The following program is brought to you in conjunction with the folks at Grace to All with Paul Gray. Now we bring to you the Agape Guy Show with your host, Lenny Manning.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Agape Guy Show. I'm your host, Lenny Manning. Today I'm talking about something so controversial that I'm going to give you a word of warning for extremely controversial content. So, viewer discretion is advised. Today I'm talking about a subject that I promised myself I would never talk about on this show. That's because I've seen people who believe in a loving God disagree about this and say very harsh things to each other. So, if this subject makes you say harsh things in response, you might want to skip this episode. Those of us who believe in God's love cringe when we see people react with such hostility and vitriol, especially when we thought those folks believed in God's love. So if you continue watching, please remain calm and look through some of the evidence I'll be mentioning in this episode. So please hold your comments, disagreements, and harsh attitudes until you hear all the evidence. You should also take the time to carefully sift through all the evidence before jumping to conclusions. I can honestly tell you that some of the evidence even shocked me. Since this is a subject that's so hotly debated, I'm mostly going to give information only, and I'm going to let you decide for yourself on what your conclusions might be. So I'm not going to demand that everybody follow my views as your one and only acceptable viewpoint. I'd simply like for you to examine the evidence for yourself. You see, the subject I want to discuss today is the subject of demons, demon possession, and a big word like egregore. I'll explain that last one in a moment. I'll list a few scholarly studies, theologians' discussions, some books, and various resources for you to consider on this subject. Then you can decide for yourself what you want to believe. Here's the list of items for you to consider. 1. There's a discussion with two theologians on this issue that you can find on YouTube. Those two theologians are Jersak and Michael Hardin. You can go to the YouTube search box and look up those two guys' names, Jersak, Hardin, and you should be able to find it. 2, the second thing you might want to research is books by the author James R. Brayshaw. He's written some very good material on this subject, and he lists some very important things to think about. 3, I'd also refer you to a YouTube series of videos by a guy who's nicknamed The Why Guy. If you go on YouTube's search box and look up the term The Why Guy, which should end up being a guy with light-colored hair, glasses, and a thick white mustache. You can then go to the middle of his page and click on the Playlists button. You can then click on the series called The Why Guy Disproving the Devil series. There are 21 videos in that series where he addresses the subject from several vantage points. I doubted this guy's videos at first, but his evidence, research, and logic is quite good, so I agree with him now. 4. You might want to look up some studies by psychologists. One study showed that people who believe in spirit entities commonly called demons or jinn are more likely to have psychosis or psychological problems. Here's a list of those studies. 1. Demonic influence. The negative mental health effects of belief in demons. This is listed in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion in 2016. That was done by Fanheo Nye, lead author, Daniel V.A. Olson, co-author. That was done in affiliation with Purdue University, Department of Sociology. 2. Belief in Demons and Exorcism in Psychiatric Patients in Switzerland. That's listed in the British Journal of Medical Psychology in 1994. That was done by Stefan Pfeiffer. That study was done in affiliation with the Psychiatric University Clinic in Basel, Switzerland, also affiliated with the Swiss Association of Psychotherapy. 3. Delusions of Possession and Religious Coping in Schizophrenia. A qualitative study of 4 cases. This is listed in Frontiers in Psychology in 2021. That was done by Igor Pietzkowitz, lead author, Farah Ibrahim, Powell Rasmus, Alexander Arn, and Natalia K. Kajawa. I hope I got that name right. That was done in affiliation with SWPS University of Social Sciences and Humanities in Poland, and the Catholic University of Lublin in Poland as well. Number 4, Demon Possession, Theology, and Mental Health. That's listed in the International Journal of Christianity and Mental Health in 2024. That was done by Christopher J. H. Cook, sole author. That was done in affiliation with the University of Oxford, Department of Theology and Religion in the UK. Okay, moving on to number 4 in my other list. Number 4, the next study is by a few psychologists who found that almost all exorcism cases were simply people with psychological problems. This can be found in multiple studies done since the 1890s. Here are some of those studies. 1. Most early research was done by Catholic priests and psychologists from the early 1800s to the 1900s. 2. The Rhine Institute, Institute for Parapsychology. Some research was done by Mr. Rhine going back to the 1930s till 1965. They traced their origins back to the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory, established in 1935 at Duke University. Mr. Rhine retired and moved his group off campus in 1965. They continued working until the 1990s. In 1995, it was renamed the Rhine Research Institute, and it's no longer affiliated with Duke University. Number 3, Society for Psychical Research, which studied this from the 1930s to the 1960s. Number 4, the latest studies were done by Dr. Richard Gallagher from the 1990s, and he released a book about it in 2020. Dr. Gallagher is a psychiatrist. Most of his studies were case-based and weren't big studies, yet in all of his over 100 cases, almost none showed any evidence of paranormal or supernatural events. Only one came close. He accompanied exorcists as they performed their exorcisms. So, as many of us reassess our views these days, we notice discrepancies between typical church teachings and real-world evidence. Many of us have turned away from bad beliefs as we reassess our views based on what stands up to scrutiny. Some of our beliefs change as we age, learn more, and mature. Some of us might believe different things tomorrow or next year. So let's try to look for the most reliable evidence we can find. Let's also refrain from saying harsh things to people merely because they have a different idea. Now, I'd like to address a few doubts that people have about this issue. I've seen a few people who have been reassessing their views, and some still believe in demons. They list a few reasons for why they believe the way they do. Let me list some of those ideas right here, right now. 1. One person says they were demon-possessed. I'll address this and give a reasonable rebuttal in a moment. 2. Another person says they think demons are real because they don't think anything else can explain multi-generational evil. This refers to ongoing and continual forms of evil that continue century after century or even through the millennia. I'll address this in a moment as well. Number 3, some people say they dealt with hauntings that seemed demonic, and they may have seen things move on their own. I'll address this issue in a moment as well. Okay, first let's address the issue of a person who says they believe demons are real because they were possessed. Here's my rebuttal. 1. There were studies of so-called demon possession and exorcism cases that were closely studied by psychologists. Yet from all the documented cases from the 1890s to the 1990s, not a single case was proved to be possession. Although a very small number came close, Dr. Richard Gallagher observed one particular case of a patient he nicknamed Julia. The patient started talking about private details of their lives when the patient couldn't have known those things. So, could this be legitimate possession or something else? Well, here's my response to that. It could have been a case where the patient had psychological problems, plus they had psychic or prophetic abilities. If Christians don't like the term psychic or they think it's too secular or not from God, perhaps we'll use the term prophetic gifts. So they might have the gift of prophecy. Well, if universal reconciliation is true and all people are already reconciled to God, then maybe God gave spiritual gifts to all people. Maybe it's like the Bible verse James 1:5, where it says, God gives to all people liberally. So maybe the patient really did have psychological problems, but also had a psychic or prophetic gift as well. So the critics might need to talk to a psychologist to get more facts before jumping to conclusions about a diagnosis, especially an unqualified diagnosis they either gave themselves or an unqualified person gave them. It might be worth talking to a psychologist. Otherwise, folks like this seem to be a bit too excitable, or they get too carried away with their own ideas. No offense, but that's the way it seems like based on the studies that I've seen. Now let's move on to number 2. This is where a person believes in demons because they think there's no explanation for multi-generational evil behavior. I believe multi-generational evil behavior can happen without spirit entities called demons, and I think it's easy to see how. There are a few good reasons for this, and a few reasonable explanations on how it can happen. If you look at groups like organized crime syndicates, I'd say they can last a long time for several obvious reasons. For one thing, they can survive a long time due to people stepping up to take control when the boss passes away. The desire for the syndicate to control situations might be what causes this type of a situation as well. This is similar to the problem with the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We form our own opinions of what's right and wrong instead of following God's love as our pattern and guide. That's what leads to a continual type of desire to control situations. If we fail to keep our focus on God's love, though, as the tree of life, we're left with differing views of right and wrong. Much of that will be based on culture and the cultural norms of each different societal group on the planet. Yet there are many cultures around the world with differing cultural opinions, so that type of a focus can't produce goodness to all people. Only a view of God's love for all people can produce goodness for all people. Attempts to control people based on culture can't do that. So the desire to control seems to be desired in order to promote self-protection and self-preservation. Yet it goes further when crime syndicates promote hurting or eliminating other people that are considered troublemakers. That creates a lot of evil behavior for the sake of self-preservation and can be perpetuated through tribalistic mindsets. That can perpetuate the situation through many generations as each boss dies and another one takes over. So that's how the situation gets perpetuated. This can also be perpetuated by big business through means of control and manipulation that big businesses use. This is also true of the many big businesses that supported Germany in World War II. Many of those businesses are still in business today. Some reports also show that they still use similar tactics to perpetuate their businesses. Some businesses employ methods of manipulation and control through bribery and schmoozing with politicians. It can also include paying for big fundraising dinners for politicians, monetary donations to their political campaigns, and giving politicians stock in their companies. A lot of this can also be perpetuated by a lot of bad ideology, bad philosophy, and bad theology as well. It can be further perpetuated when those bad ideologies lead to a lot of pride and arrogance. This can lead to extreme measures that can be employed to perpetuate self-preservation and self-protection. Originally, the Italian Syndicate was formed to protect Italian folks coming to America. It was to protect them from discrimination, racial prejudice, and violence. Yet it got out of control and is now engaged in extreme forms of self-preservation. Okay, let's move on to the third one in that big list. There is also the third group that says they dealt with demonic hauntings. The demonic haunting might include them seeing objects move on their own, hearing disembodied voices, getting scratched, or seeing apparitions. So I'll state my rebuttal this way. The folks who believe in demonic hauntings need to look at the research I pointed out in my previous episode where I pointed some other things out about ghosts. I'll restate the conclusions of that research real quick right now. 1. Some studies found that PK energy can cause objects to seemingly move on their own. 2. Another study with over 100 years of research found no evidence for demon possession. The problems seem to always be due to psychological problems or misdiagnoses brought on by jumping to conclusions. 3. Another big study found that people who believe in demons have a higher likelihood of having psychological problems. So you might want to make sure the things you saw weren't due to someone else's psychosis or your own psychosis. 4. Near-death experiences also show that people's spirits can stick around for a while, so all hauntings aren't necessarily demons. It could be spirits from deceased humans. To help with this, you might want to examine a couple of books. The first has extensive research, and it's titled The Science of Near-Death Experiences, and that's by Dr. John Hagen. The second is by Dr. Eben Alexander, and it's titled Proof of Heaven. Those books should help with this subject of NDEs. And number 5, it could also be that disruptive hauntings are human spirits who got stuck here on Earth. They could have died in a traumatic way. They might want to warn of danger, or they might be angry about certain things. Maybe that's making the disturbances. Number 6, some people point to the show by famous broadcaster Paul Harvey and his famous broadcast on this subject. He said the worst thing we can do is think there is no devil. Well, what if he was going by bad information? Then again, what if he considered quote-unquote the devil to be people's bad behaviors and not a spirit entity? That might be quite a bit different than what most people think about the things insinuated in that broadcast. I'd also have to ask, what if the evidence points to something other than spirit entities that people commonly call demons? These studies seem to point to something else. Well, I personally feel led to follow the evidence, especially the evidence in these studies that I've talked about here on this episode. Now, let's take a look at the big word I mentioned a bit earlier in the show, which is the word egregore. According to the Urban Dictionary that you can find on the internet, they list its definition like these that I've listed here. 1. A non-physical entity that's made of the collective thoughts of a specific group of people. 2. Symbols, ideas, or ideals that exist in the collective psyche of a group of people and are thought to have an autonomous existence. That special sickness that came out in the year 2020 that started with the letter C, it could be considered an egregore. Just look at how much attention it's getting. The AI assistant for DuckDuckGo search engine says this: an egregore is a concept in Western esotericism that refers to a non-physical entity or thought form. It arises from the collective thoughts and emotions of a distinct group of individuals. This entity can influence the thoughts and actions of the group while also being shaped by them. Here's its nature. It has a collective mind. Egregores are often described as a group mind or collective consciousness that emerges when people come together for a common purpose. It seems like an autonomous entity. Once formed, an egregore can act independently of its creators, influencing them in return. I'd also add that it could be what Michael Hardin and René Girard show to be a mimetic sacrificial scapegoating system. Going back to DuckDuckGo, examples of this are these. 1. Organizations. Corporations can be seen as egregores as they exist independently of their founders and are shaped by the collective actions of their employees. 2. Cultural phenomena. National identities or popular cultural symbols can also be considered egregores as they embody the collective beliefs and emotions of the group. DuckDuckGo's AI also lists these examples of modern egregores. Modern-day examples of egregores include collective movements or ideologies such as social media trends, political movements, or even popular brands that evoke strong emotional responses and shared beliefs among their followers. These entities can influence public opinion and behavior, acting as a kind of collective consciousness shaped by the thoughts and emotions of the group involved. And that's all for DuckDuckGo's description. So, an egregore is basically an out-of-control ideology of a group or collective group of people. The collective ideology can end with bad consequences. The consequences are usually blamed on spirit entities called demons or some type of evil. The consequences can show up in a few different ways. What's interesting is that the bad consequences can show up in other bad conclusions or unfortunate conclusions. An example of this can be where a crime isn't solved, so people jump to many conclusions. They might either start pointing the finger of blame at people who there's no evidence to show the person's guilty of anything. It can also show up as a group calling for the police officer initially on the scene or the investigator to be fired. These egregores can sway public opinion through social media in some very bad ways sometimes. Egregores can also lead paranormal investigators to jump to conclusions that a place is haunted merely due to creaking floors. It can lead social media to guide public opinion to move to very bad conclusions and very bad behaviors. Many of these egregores can lead to extreme forms of tribalism and hatred of people who have different beliefs. It can also lead to hatred of people from other countries, other cultures, or so-called outsiders. So let's remember that all people are loved by God, bar none. So let's refrain from thinking our cultural ideas make us better than everyone else, because that's just prideful. Let's also refuse to consider our customs to be so important that we need to force them on everyone else. Showing and sharing God's love must be our highest priority. I'd also add that what if evil is caused by our negative emotions producing low-frequency vibrations that are contagious, such as love being a high vibration and hate or anger being low vibrations? Love breeds love, and hate breeds hate. You can see that principle in Proverbs 10:12, Matthew 5:44, and 1 John 4:20. So maybe it doesn't need a spirit entity, but only our bad attitudes and bad behaviors or bad decisions. That's just a thought that I want you to think about as a possible alternative explanation. It could all be based on our bad decisions that produce bad behaviors and bad attitudes when we don't believe God is loving. Now, in closing, let me say this. When I was an adolescent guy, I saw so much bad behavior from adults that I figured we didn't need a devil. I believe this because we already had enough evil behavior coming from our own pride, lust, and greed. So let's all be willing to sit down calmly and seriously look at this evidence. Try to avoid knee-jerk reactions because a certain view made you angry. So remember that God's love is our highest priority, and that love is what allows us to interact peacefully. Otherwise, things can get out of control and can turn into heated arguments. I've noticed that arguments on this subject are unnecessary, unhelpful, and counterproductive. So let's not have a harsh attitude about this subject. So don't even worry about it, and don't let it get on your nerves. Remember that God loves all of us with an unconditional and everlasting love that is unwavering and unrelenting. So let me also say that I love all of you folks. I hope I don't get kicked off the air or get a bad reputation for doing shows like this one and this whole paranormal series. So I just want to say, bless you all, and may God's love greatly enrich your life. Then on that note, I hope to see you in the next episode of the Agape Guy Show. Goodbye for now.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love. I see the flags unfurl and they're blowing the other way. I see the anchor rising and the ship moving away. I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love. I see the daylight break after a long sleepless night. I see them shield their eyes